Sir, is my screen visible?
Yes, Subhitna,
Thank you.
it's visible.
Yes, thank you, sir.
இது மூணு 6,000 7 lakh.
Yeah, Dr. Subhathana, you can just stop sharing your screen. Yeah, we'll play. And can you just turn on your video so that we can see whether things are fine? The voice is audible. Check. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Right.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah. Yes, you are audible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Subratana, you can share your screen and page. You can keep.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. We'll start in 2 minutes, exactly at 7.
Is my screen
Yes.
visible, sir?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Thank you.
Can you just move to the next slide, whether that is moving? Yeah, yes. Yes. We can see. Yeah. Right. Just announcements for the participants. We welcome you to the day 3 of this 5-day series on qualitative research in political and social sciences. Uh, you might have joined for the day 1 and day 2. Your attendance will be counted based on the feedback forms that you submit. So feedback form links will be shared at around 7:55 during the Q&A session in the chat box here in the Zoom. It will not be shared in the WhatsApp group. So we, sincerely insist you to stay till the end and then give your feedback. That will be counted as attendance, right? And then we will have 5 days and 5-day feedback and one final feedback we will give. And whatever the name that you mentioned, the final feedback, that will be counted for your certificates. And certificates we will send you probably in a couple of days after the 5 days. Time is 7 o'clock and it's the right time to start our day 3. Today we are going to look at the theoretical framework and conceptual clarity for improved manuscripts in social science research. Especially when you think about the frameworks, most of our works, even though they are very good, but they fail to have a framework, a structured way to push the paper into the good journals. And today we are going to get some more clarity on that. And we have with us Dr. Subirtana, who is assistant professor in the Department of Political Science. And she is having 5.5 years of experience in teaching. And she focuses on international relations, foreign policy, human rights, gender studies, and public policy. And she's a very good researcher with a lot of publications in premier journals, as well as in many book chapters. And then the one outstanding feature, or one of the outstanding features, I would say, that the project that she has completed, that is worth of 23 lakhs from the ICSSR funding. So she is a prolific researcher with a lot of publications and the funding and book chapters and a lot of presentations and so on. So we are going to have a great time of learning in terms of frameworks. And I invite Dr. Subirtana to take the stage. Over to you. Yeah, you can turn on the camera as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, sir. First of all, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my department at MCC and the Madras Christian College Research Colloquium for giving me this opportunity to deliver a lecture on theoretical framework and conceptual clarity for improved manuscripts in social science research. So before we directly go into the topic for today, I would like to just give a small recap of what we've seen for the past 2 days, because today's lecture is going to be a continuation of what we've seen for the past 2 days. So on the first day, my very good friend from the department spoke about how anything can become a research topic, and especially in social science, how you can derive ideas and get inspiration from anything that's around you and build a research around that. And on the second day, again, Kiran Rahul from the Department of Political Science spoke about how this idea can be built into a research topic for you to, do a full-fledged study in that particular area. So today we are going to talk about how to further take this one step ahead, and how we can take this into getting it published into an index journal or a high quality journal as a researcher. So most of the time something that as researchers we so what we'll be seeing in today's presentation is why theory. So this, as a researcher, most of the time, as a budding researcher, at the beginning of your career, you would have always, wondered, does research always have to have theory, or, how to incorporate theory into my study? So in today's presentation, I will be talking to you about, why theory matters and the role of theory in qualitative research, and what are the various types or, prominent types of, theories that can be used in social science research. And next we will talk about what theoretical framework is and conceptual clarity, and then I will also be touching upon the distinction between conceptual clarity and conceptual framework. And then finally we will have a small exercise where I will be building a research topic into a theoretical framework, and also be giving you conceptual clarity on the various variables we're using for that particular study. And then we'll finally deal with how to improvise our manuscripts to get published in index journals or high quality journals. So as a researcher in social science, we always have this preconceived notions that unless and until you have numerals or use statistical tools in your study, it's not going to get published in index journals, or it's going to be rejected by either Scopus or all of these journals that we aspire to publish in. So three of the core statements that actually scare social science researchers is having a weak theoretical foundation, lacking conceptual clarity, and finally being more descriptive rather than analytical in nature. Most of the time these are the statements we receive from our reviewers when we submit a manuscript for publication. So next, when we talk about why this topic actually matters, we are all researchers in social science, and of course getting published in high index journals is very important for us, to either from a research background or as an academician, to bring our research work or to extend our contribution to the society. So common problems that we face when submitting manuscripts is lack of clarity, weak arguments, and poor structure. So when you have theory in your research, it's going to give you a foundation for the entire study. So having a strong theory plus clear concepts will contribute to a strong research. That will definitely enable you to get visibility with high index journals for publication. So next we'll move on to talking about why theory and the role of theory. So when we talk about why theory matters, or why we have to use theory in research. So for this I would like to explain to you with a small example, with a small story. So this story is called Map in the Forest. So let's assume that there are two sets of researchers wandering in a forest. One group of researchers have a map in their hand, and another group of researchers don't have a map in their hand. And these two groups of researchers are wandering in the forest. So the group of researchers who don't have a map in their hand are also looking at and observing certain things around them. They are looking at certain paths that are directing them towards a certain towards taking a certain path. There are maybe rocks, there are trees, there are so many other things around them that they are observing. But the group that has a map in their hand know what path they have to take. They also know what exactly lies on that path, and whether or not they have to take that path. They can clearly determine which path to take and what lies when you take that particular path. So theory in research is almost is like the map that is given in your hand. So theory is the map. So it just doesn't show what exists. It also helps with deciding where to go with the research. It explains to you, it makes you understand what you are seeing in front of you, and it also predicts what you have to expect in the path that you take. So when you use when you use a theory in your research, it clearly gives you a direction in which you have to move for you to arrive at what you are expecting to arrive. So three things you have to always keep in mind is that when you employ a theory into your research, it is going to clearly tell you what to expect, where exactly you have to go, what you are observing in front of you, and what you possibly should be expecting while doing this research. And these three things are very important in doing research. Clearly knowing what path to take, what direction I have to go in, that determines your research design. What you are seeing, that clearly talks about the methodology that you're going to employ and what you might find next, what you are to expect in your research. So this talks about the interpretation that you will be doing later. So these three things are very important as a researcher, that will clearly give you a foundation for your research. So without theory, research is directionless. With theory, it brings meaning into your research. It creates a purpose and a meaning for your research. So what exactly is the role of theory? So when you talk about role of theory in research, it clearly helps you frame the research questions. When you employ a theory into your research, you will be able to effectively understand what exactly you're supposed to do for this particular study. That will help you frame the research questions for you to Second of all, once you have understood what exactly you have to study, you also know how you have to study this particular topic. So then you will be able to determine the methodology that you are supposed to use for this particular study. And finally, it helps with interpretation. When we talk about interpretation, you use a theory in your study. You also understand what methodology to use to collect the data. When you talk about interpretation, this is where the theory helps you understand why you have received at certain, you have received certain data, or you have come to a certain conclusion. And this understanding is very important in qualitative research. So framing of research question, methodology, and interpretation. Most of the time, as researchers, when you talk about theoretical framework, employing theory in your research, we think theory is only useful to understand the problem. The theory that you employ has to take you throughout the research. It has to connect the entirety of the research for you to understand how and why certain things happen, for you to come up with a concrete research in your hand. So next, I have listed out some of the basic theories, that as social science researchers, that we can use for to understand or to do research. So first is, grand theories. So these are broad and highly abstract in nature. It explains, large scale, issues in the society. So some of the examples are, functionalism, Marxism, where you can, understand the entire working of the society, at large. So grand theories are mostly used to understand the problem at a larger scale. So next we move on to middle range theories. So these are less abstract and more practical in nature, where you can employ it to build a theoretical framework. So these deal with specific social phenomena. So middle range theories most often help in building theoretical frameworks. For example, I have mentioned theory of social mobility. So you can use theory of social mobility to specifically understand how mobility affects family life, how social mobility could increase in crime rate or decrease in crime rate, or how social mobility can have an effect on education. So this is middle range theories often help or contribute to building theoretical frameworks at a much effective way. So next you have micro theories. So micro theories are used to understand or focus on a particular individual or a small group behavior. So here I have used symbolic interactionism as an example. So symbolic interactionism explains to you, your daily interactions, how people interact amongst themselves, how two individuals interact, how micro theories can also contribute to you understanding particular case studies, or why a person behaves in a particular way. So these are commonly the three most prominent theories that can be employed in social science research. So next, moving on to theoretical framework. So this is going to be the most important part of the presentation. So we are going to focus on two major areas: theoretical framework and conceptual clarity. So theoretical framework most often answers the why questions in a research, why certain things happen, and gives you a clarity as to what to expect when certain things happen. So when you talk about theoretical framework, it is a structured set of concepts and that you derive through certain existing theories that guide you designing your research, and with the interpretation of the data that you collect through the research study. So what are the key functions of a theoretical framework? When you have a theoretical framework, it anchors your study in existing knowledge. When you build a theoretical framework for your particular study, it creates a very firm base for your research topic. So you will be using multiple theories or a core theory with a complementary theory. In any case, it already gives you a foundation on which you can build your research on. Next is explains relationships between variables. So once you have a theory in mind and you know that this is the theory that's going to clearly explain to me what I have to study with respect to this topic, you will be able to determine the list of variables or the constructs that are required for you to study that particular topic. So it is also with the help of theory, you will also be able to understand how these variables are going to behave with each other and what kind of relationship these theories are going to be, variables are going to have with each other. So it also helps you explain the relationship between variables. Next, it guides hypothesis formulation. So once you have a theory in mind, you have justified why you're using this theory, and you have also listed the various constructs, concepts or variables you'll be studying for your particular research topic. By explaining the relationship between these various variables that you are going to study in your research topic, you will be able to formulate your hypothesis, which you will be proving or disproving in your once And finally, it provides a lens for interpretation, which means that once you do the, once you employ the methodology and once you have collected the data required for your particular study, theory will help you interpret the data that you have collected. And this again is a very important role theory plays in social science researches. Through the understanding of the theory that you have employed, you will be able to interpret what you have found through your research. And this will give a very concrete binding to your research, which will give you much more chances of getting your social science or qualitative research published in high indexed journals. So the difference between theory and theoretical framework. A theory is a general explanation. It talks about why certain things happen, how it happens. It's a basic generic explanation. However, theoretical framework is how you apply this theory to your study. So the application of a particular theory or a group of theories to your study is what is theoretical framework. So most of the time, you would have wondered, I have submitted my manuscript to the reviewer, but then he's rejected saying there's no, theoretical background for my particular study, but I have mentioned so many theories in my research. A huge mistake often researchers, do is that just mentioning theories in your research will not contribute to you having a theoretical framework. It is only when you apply the theory to build the relationship amongst variables and to use the theory to arrive at the interpretation? Do you have a theoretical framework that you have used to study a particular topic? So just naming few theories in your manuscript or your research paper will not promise you a publication in a highly indexed journal, or will not contribute to you claiming to have a theoretical framework. So next, what are the components of a strong theoretical framework? Again, core theory or theories, key constructs, having hypothesis, assumptions and boundaries. So to further explain what these basically mean in depth. So your theoretical framework should have a strong theory or multiple theories that actually have a contribution to your study. So as a researcher, as a social science researcher, it is also important for you to identify theories. At the same time, it is also important for you to justify why you're using those theories in your study. Without justifying how a theory contributes to your study, just naming theories in your paper is not going to be useful. Next, key constructs defined with scholarly sources. So once you have identified a theory that is going to explain your study and you have justified how it is going to explain your study, you will come up with certain key concepts or constructs that will help you understand the study further. So it is also important as a researcher for you to define these key constructs that you are going to employ in your research study. Only when you are able to define these key constructs and you are able to properly define them with scholarly sources will you be able to build a relationship between these variables that will lead you to formulation of hypothesis. And finally, when you talk about assumptions, again, you have to go back to the map in the forest, story. When you have a map in your hand, you know what lies ahead of you. You are well prepared as to what path to take. Similarly, a theoretical framework will also enable you to assume what to assume. It will help you understand what to assume in the process of your research. So it will explicitly state what are the various assumptions that you can have in mind while doing your research. And finally, boundary conditions. When you have a theoretical framework in place and you have used a strong theory to formulate this particular framework for you, you will also know what are the boundaries that exist in this particular research. For example, with context, to what extent can I extend this study? What are the limitations with respect to the study? And what kind of population am I supposed to expect for this particular study? So all these boundaries and conditions you will be able to understand well in advance when you have a theoretical framework. So all of this will contribute to you having a strong theoretical framework in hand. So how to build a theoretical framework? This again is a very, very important task that a researcher has to undergo while doing a research paper or research in general. So just like my friends who previously presented for the last for the past 2 days spoke about how important reading is in research. For you to build a theoretical framework also, review of literature is very important. As a researcher, it's extremely imperative for you to read and to build your knowledge around the scholarly sources and the review and the literature that is available in abundance. Is it important that is it enough that I have thought of a topic, I just go and read 2 theories and I try to employ them? Often it might not lead to you building a strong theoretical framework. And most of the time what this could lead to is it might affect how you build relations amongst the variables that you're mentioning within your study. So when you will have a clear understanding of the building of your theoretical framework is when you have the knowledge of how theories work and how many theories can contribute to your study. So when you have this understanding, you will exactly know as a researcher what theory I need, what theory I do not need for my study, and how I am going to employ this theory for my study. Not all theories will be applied the same way in every research topic. So only when you read and have a review of literature, when you have the knowledge of literature, will you be able to understand exactly what theories to take, what theories not to take, and how to employ these theories for your particular study. So the first and foremost important point in building a theoretical framework is review of literature. Next is find out what others have said about the key concepts in your particular research. So once you have determined what theory to use and you clearly know how to employ that theory in your study, you will know what are the various variables that you have to study to understand those concepts. You would have determined what is going to be your independent variable, what is your dependent variable, what could be your mediating variables, moderating variables. You would have determined all of this. So it is also extremely important for you as a researcher to go and read what others have told about these concepts. One, it gives you a clarity as to how to define these concepts. Second, you also get to understand how they have built a relationship with the use of these concepts with other theories, and how they have created a coherence amongst these theories. That is also important for you to build a theoretical framework. Next, how these concepts relate to each other. Once you have clearly defined the concepts that you are using in your particular research paper, it is also important for you to create a relationship between these concepts. Only when you create a relationship or you clearly define how they are related with each other, will you be able to study these concepts in entirety. So a theory is simply about how something works. Why you need a theoretical framework is to answer the why question, why certain things are happening. It's a way of explaining patterns, behaviors, experiences, and social processes that happen around you. And the most important question as a researcher you have to ask yourself when you are building a theoretical framework is, which of the existing theories am I using to understand my study? Right? So there are n number of theories available. So you as a researcher have to answer this question. Amongst all these theories, which of the theories is relevant to me and how it is relevant to my study? The entirety of your theoretical framework, or you strongly building a theoretical framework, clearly depends on how you define what theory you use and why you are using it in your study. For you to just understand, how to use a theory to understand certain things, I have given a small example: student performance review. As academicians in schools, in colleges, we often do a student performance review, how students are performing with respect to certain things. I have chosen two different theories to just explain to you how you can incorporate it into understanding student performance. So first is Erving Goffman's dramaturgical theory. So Erving Goffman's dramaturgical theory basically says that human interaction is basically a theoretical performance. So here, when you employ this theory, you will be able to ask questions related to, are students purely putting up a show, or are they performing in front of a teacher? Are students displaying confidence and capabilities in front of the teacher? So when you understand it from a theatrical performance aspect, you will be able to answer all these questions. Are students in the name of performance review, are they just putting up a show in front of you? And then you will be able to list out the indicators to how to study those that particular variable. So another theory that I have used is psychological safety theory. So psychological safety theory talks about how in a social setup, within an organizational setup, often people feel safe to take risks. So here I have mentioned, it could help you to study whether students feel safe to be honest in a performance review. Does power impact how performance happens with students? For example, does it when students are answering a junior professor, how the performance changes. When they answer to the head of the department, how the performance changes. Next is the department culture. Does the department culture have an effect on understanding the performance, the student performance in general. So this is how you can actually employ theory to understand or to list out certain variables that could contribute to understanding the entirety of a particular topic. So next we move on to conceptual clarity. So when we spoke about theoretical framework, we told that theoretical framework helps us answer the why questions in a research. So conceptual clarity helps us answer the how questions in a research, how certain things happen. So this is where you define the concepts that you have in your particular research, and you also mention what are the indicators that you are using to define those particular concepts that you are employing in your research, and this will help you answer how certain things are happening. So conceptual clarity is about your particular research or project. It is the key ideas that you are working with and how they connect with each other. So conceptual clarity refers to precise definition of constructs, clear boundaries between concepts, and consistent use of terminology. So when can you as a researcher say that you have conceptual clarity in your manuscript or your research paper? When you are able to define the concepts or variables or constructs that you are using to study your particular topic. Second is when you have clear boundaries between these concepts. What do you mean by boundaries? Oftentimes, in social science research, in qualitative research, we use, ambiguous terms or, abstract terms to understand certain things. We talk about stress, we talk about anxiety. We might use this in the same paper. It is very important for us to clearly define the boundaries between using these terminologies. And finally, consistent use of terminology throughout the paper, throughout the manuscript. Once you have defined a particular construct or a concept, you have to maintain consistency throughout the paper. You cannot throw new terminologies or new words as and when you like. This will create a kind of confusion for the reviewer. So next, when you talk about conceptual clarity, this particularly focuses on what are the main ideas in your research and how do these ideas relate to each other. This is what conceptual clarity will be addressing. So for you to understand, again I've taken the performance review example, student performance review example. So what could be the various concepts that we could use to understand student performance? So here I'm talking about students, teachers, performance reviews, class, exams, stress, assignments, anxiety, preparation, behavior, leadership, interaction. Defining all these concepts is very important for you to claim that you have conceptual clarity. When I say all these concepts, doesn't mean your study should have all of these concepts. But in case you are mentioning these concepts in your study, you have to clearly define these concepts before you use them or you study them for your particular research. So here I have given a simple diagram to understand how conceptual clarity will help you derive to interpretations or further explanations. So I am talking about preparation. So before a student comes for a student performance review, the student will go through a process of preparation. Either the student could be over prepared or no preparation at all. So how this how this is connected to the behavior of the student in the performance review. Depending on if at all the student is over prepared, they might be confident, their behavior might be confident in the performance review. If they have no preparation, they might avoid questions in the student review, or they might exhibit nervousness in the performance review. So this is how defining concepts will clearly make you understand the relationship between the various concepts in your research study. So when you explain what preparation is, then you will be able to clearly connect it to how this preparation will affect the behavior of a student in the performance review. So conceptual clarity just not lets you define concepts, but it also helps you build a relationship between these concepts. So why conceptual clarity matters? So this avoids construct overlap. It when you define the concepts that you are using in your particular study, you will be able to avoid misleading the reviewer or the reader into understanding that it is something else. It enhances validity and replicability. Once you have defined your particular constructs, this is what it is and this is what I am trying to study in my particular research, then you will be able to have a you will be able to validate your finding, and also increase the possibility of replicating your finding. Next is it improves reader comprehension. So once you have defined the terminologies or the concepts that you are using in your particular research, the reader has a very good clarity or an understanding of what it exactly means in the places where you use it and how you employ those constructs. And finally, it reduces reviewer rejection risk, because your study will have a clear-cut clarity as to what exactly you're trying to say. So how to build conceptual clarity in your research? So this is a step-by-step approach. So first you have to identify the variables that you're going to use in your research. Second, you have to conduct a conceptual literature review, which means you have to go and find out how these variables have been defined in other studies. Then you have to define those variables according to the study that you are going to do. But something that you have to always keep in mind is that these definitions that you give should always be backed by scholarly sources. In this case, I have mentioned use authoritative definitions. So what do I mean by authoritative definition is that in case you are talking about stress, in case you're talking about depression, in case you're talking about empowerment, you have to always give a clear definition as to what it exactly means and how it has been reflected in various other studies. So you should be able to be authoritative in saying this is what I mean when I use this word in my particular study. And next, differentiate similar constructs. This again often becomes a problem in social science research when we use different variables and we don't define it properly. Then there is a possibility of people misunderstanding it means one and the same. So I have given an example at the bottom. So motivation, engagement, satisfaction, these are all words that could be interpreted in similar ways by the reviewer. So it's very important for you to clearly define what it means in your particular research. And finally, you have to establish the relationship between these variables that you have used for your study. So part 3 will be exercise. So what I have done here is I have given a topic, a research topic, and will show you how we can build a theoretical framework and give conceptual clarity, so that you will be able to understand the step-by-step process of how we can build it from the topic to to building a theoretical framework and give conceptual clarities to the variables that we have used in the study. So here I am talking about impact of social media usage on academic performance of college students. So here the topic itself reflects that there are certain words that are very important. The social media usage, academic performance amongst students. So these are the most important variables that are mentioned in the topic. So what is the research problem here? Excessive use of social media may affect students with respect to their studying habits, concentration and academic outcomes. So for us to build a theoretical framework for this particular topic, we have to first identify the variables that we are going to study for this topic. So we have our independent variable, dependent variable, mediating variables and moderating variables. So what are independent variables? Independent variables are those that are the cause. Independent variables can be controlled by the researcher, or these are the this is the variable that will have an effect on the dependent variable. So then when you talk about dependent variable, these are the dependent variable is a result of your independent variable, which basically means that depending on how your independent variable behaves, your dependent variable will also change. So independent variable is the cause, dependent variable is the effect. This is the relationship between your independent variable and your dependent variable. So what it basically means is that with increase in social media usage, academic performance might drop amongst students. So the cause is increase in social media usage and the effect is drop in academic performance. So your independent variable will have a relationship with your dependent variable, and your independent variable will be the cause and your dependent variable will be the effect. So what are mediating variables? So mediating variables are often variables that explain how it affects the variable. So here I have mentioned time management and sleep patterns. So how I am trying to explain here is that social media usage may disrupt time management among students that could affect academic performance. So we are trying to explain that with students lacking time management, they will not be able to perform academically. So this is what mediating variables will do. They will mediate between the independent and the dependent variable, and it will clearly tell you how the relationship is established between these two variables. Another example I can give you is that social media usage may affect sleep patterns among students that might affect academic performance. Next, what are moderating variables? So moderating variables are those that actually explain the strength of that talks about the effect of the strength or the direction in which these variables move. So for example, I have mentioned self-discipline. So depending on increase in self-discipline amongst with a student, their capability of managing time might differ, which might affect their academic performance. So these are what are moderating variables. This will clearly moderating variables will clearly explain to you what is exactly the the effect of the strength of that mediating variable, and in what direction it will push the variables to behave. So now that we have explained the key variables for our study, now we have to employ theories that we will be using to build a theoretical framework. So here I am using three theories that will explain how this study can be further done. So first is social exchange theory. What does social exchange theory talk about? It specifically says that in a society, when you expect certain rewards, there is a cost that you have to pay. So when students use social media, there is a certain amount of cost you have to pay for the rewards that you get by probably student interaction or entertainment. And this cost could be time loss, distraction. All of this could be the cost that you pay for the reward that you receive. So this is what social exchange theory talks about. Second is cognitive load theory. Cognitive load theory says that the brain has some amount of capacity, and when you increase the overload of your brain, it reduces the ability to focus on other activities. And next is time displacement theory. What does time displacement theory talk about? It specifically says that when you dedicate an amount of time for one particular activity, automatically your the amount of time you can dedicate for another activity decreases. So this is what is time displacement theory. So I feel that these three theories could contribute to my study in understanding how social media impacts academic performance amongst college students. So I have identified the three theories, and now I have to build a theoretical framework. So I will have to justify how these theories can be used to build a theoretical framework to understand this particular topic. So now what I'm trying to say, my independent variable is social media usage. Next, my mediators are time management, sleep, or attention. Next, I have academic performance as my dependent variable. So depending on how much time I use, how much time I employ, in social media usage, my time management, my academic performance can be disrupted. And this academic performance disruption could be due to lack of time management that I am I am not able to do because of the amount of time I'm using to scroll through social media. Or it could also contribute to the amount of social media engagement that I am having could result in me having disturbed sleep, which can affect my academic performance. Or I can interpret it saying that the increase in social media usage has affected my attention span, that has affected my academic performance. And here I can use moderators to understand how these variables relate to each other. For example, in some students self discipline might be high, in some students self discipline might be low. So in students that have high self discipline, they despite having social media engagement, they might still be able to manage their time, and how this affects academic performance. And then I have spoken about type of content. For example, your social media engagement might also be for academic purposes. You might be viewing educational videos, you might reading articles on social media platforms. So depending on the type of content that you use, also how it what kind of effect it might have on your academic performance. So now I have created a clear cut theoretical framework as to my independent variable, how it could affect my dependent variable, and what could be the mediators in between, what could be creating this causing this effect between the independent and dependent variable, and what are the moderators that can be introduced into the study that can change the understanding of these of this particular study. So once I have created this, I will be able to formulate my hypothesis. So as I told previously, your theoretical framework does not only let you understand the problem, but also will help you formulate your hypothesis. So here I have formulated three hypotheses. First is higher social media usage leads to lower academic performance. Second is poor time management mediates the relationship. And third is self-discipline weakens the negative effect. So these are the three hypotheses that I have tried to formulate in my, through building my theoretical framework. So next, the explanation that I will be able to give here is that this framework shows that social media does not directly affect performance, but works through reduced study time, increased distraction, or poor cognitive focuses. So imagine without the use of any of these theories, if I have to just say social media usage affects academic performance amongst college students, I will not be able to substantiate it by saying how it affects. So here with the theoretical framework, I am able to tell how it will affect academic performance, either through reduced study time, increased distraction, or through poor cognitive focus. So now a theoretical framework has clearly made you answer the question how in your research work. So next we have to come to the conceptual clarity. So we have come up with all the variables that are required for our particular study. So here I am trying to define these conceptual clarity concepts that we have used for our study. So conceptual clarity means defining key concepts precisely to avoid ambiguity in your research. It could mean other things in general dictionary terms, but what you mean in your research. So you have to clearly define what do you mean by social media usage. So here I am trying to say that it refers to the amount and pattern of time spent by students on platforms like Instagram, and others. So how am I going to understand this? This is where I use indicators: time spent per day, frequency of checking apps, type of usage. So here I am also trying to understand the quality and quantity of engagement. So next, academic performance. I'm moving on to the dependent variable. So here I'm trying to define that refers to the educational achievement of students. So here the indicators are I could understand their educational achievements through grades, test scores, assignment completion, class preparation. So all of this will help me understand how they are able to fare education with their academic performance. Next I'm moving on to the mediating variables. So here time management. Again I have to define what I mean by time management. Refers to how effectively students plan and allocate time for study and other activities. So here the indicators through which I will be able to study is that study schedule, time spent on academic tasks, ability to avoid procrastination. So this will be a mediating concept. So next I will have sleep patterns. Sleep again I'm defining it as duration and quality of sleep affected by social media usage. So what are the indicators? Hours of sleep that a student gets, sleep disturbances, late night usage of social media, poor sleep reduces concentration and academic efficiency. So this is the coherence I'm able to make. And then attention and concentration. Again focus on academic task. When I talk about attention here in my study, I'm talking about focus on academic task without distraction. So what could be the indicators for me to find out this? Ability to sustain focus when you're studying, ability to sustain the focus, frequency of distractions, how often you are getting distracted, and then how much you are able to multitask, the multitasking behavior that you are able to exhibit. And then when we talk about moderating variables, self discipline and type of content consumed. So when you talk about self discipline, I'm talking about the ability of students to control their behavior and resist distraction. So how will I be able to understand this? Are students able to limit social media usage, following study plans, goal oriented behavior? If they set a goal, are they able to do it? So this through this I'll be able to understand. Next, content consumed. So what kind of content they are viewing in social media. Are they educational or entertainment based? So depending on this the content that they view will influence the will have a positive or negative impact on the dependent variable. So this is how when you build a research paper, you have to clearly define your concepts that you are using in your research. If at all you do not define these, then it creates ambiguity, and when the reviewer is reading your paper, they will have a confusion as to what exactly you're trying to say in your research paper. So now that I have defined my concepts, I will be able to build a relationship between these concepts. So high social media usage reduces time management and sleep quality. This leads to poor attention and concentration, ultimately affects academic performance. However, self-discipline and content type can change the strength of this relationship. So now I have clearly built a relationship amongst the concepts that I have introduced for my study. So this will clearly give you an understanding as to what the study is going to do and how it is going to do. So now with giving clear understanding of concepts and defining these concepts, you are able to answer how you're going to do this particular study. So now that we have understood how to build a theoretical framework and how to build conceptual clarity, how to have conceptual clarity in your manuscript, next we move on to common problems that you face in your manuscript. When you talk about theoretical aspects, name dropping theories without integration. So I have already mentioned this previously. You cannot just mention theories and expect the reviewer to assume that you have actually applied those theories. If at all you're mentioning a theory, it has to be employed or applied to your particular research work for you to claim that you have a theoretical framework. Next is multiple theories with no coherence. As a researcher, can I just name 10 theories in my research paper and just to say that I have a theoretical understanding? No. The theories that you introduce in your paper should be able to clearly establish a relationship amongst themselves as to why these theories are used in your research paper and how these theories complement or relate with each other. If you fail to do this, again, just mentioning theories in your manuscript or your research paper will not give a clarity as to what exactly you're trying to do. And more specifically, this will create an impression with the reviewer that you lack clarity as to what direction in which you have to take your research forward. So finally, it lacks theoretical justification. You won't be able to justify how you have interpreted your data, on what basis you have come up with the conclusion. So next, when we move on to conceptual issues, here undefined variables, this will create ambiguity. So it is very important for you to define your variables. Next is interchangeable use of terms. Using different terms at different places, using one particular term in a different place. It is very it's very important as a researcher for you to avoid all these things. If you are using a particular term for a particular purpose, it's very important that you stick to that term and not suddenly introduce a new term which will also create a kind of confusion with the reviewer as to it will clearly state that you as a reviewer is not as a researcher is not clear as to what you are doing. And finally, measurement mismatch. This again is a very serious problem that most of the time we have with conceptual clarity. We will if we are not defining the concepts properly, this will affect us with how we are going to measure these concepts. For example, if you have to measure educational level of a person and skill level of a person, these are two different things. So when you don't define them and you measure them, the interpretation might be completely something else. So defining these terminologies or concepts in your particular research is very important as to how you measure them and how they affect your research at the end. So then finally, what are the strategies you can inculcate to improve your manuscripts? For theoretical strength, if you are a beginner in research and you're just starting to do research, it's always better to use one dominant theory. This will avoid fragmentation. So you can just stick to one core theory or one core theory and a complementary theory through which you will be able to explain what you are trying to do, rather than employing multiple theories which might later create problems for you to build relations amongst them. Next is justified theory selection. I have chosen a theory, but I have not justified why I have chosen a theory. This again, will not, give a very concrete foundation to your manuscript. So how you can improvise your manuscript, how you can convince the reviewer that you know what you are doing is when you justify and tell them, this is why I have chosen this particular theory for my study. And then finally, show how your study extends the theory. So you have taken a theory, and then how you extend this theory for your study with choosing of variables, creating, building a theoretical framework. All of this will help in you, conveying the reviewer that you have a very strong theoretical framework. And then when you come to conceptual clarity, provide operational definitions. Tell what exactly it is functioning with respect to your research. We do not need, dictionary terminologies. We do not want to know definitions that, somebody else has used. You as a reviewer define what you mean by that particular concept in your particular study. Next, you can use diagrams to explain, how these concepts work. For example, previously I showed how preparation can, affect performance. So you can build, use diagrams to explain, how these concepts work, and how they have a relation. And then finally, this will help you maintain consistency throughout the manuscript. When you have defined concepts or defined variables in your study, it will help you clearly maintain a consistency throughout your manuscript, which will enable you convince the reviewer that you have a clear understanding. So finally, very important question that we have to definitely answer is that, does this mean that without theory research is meaningless? See, you might have had this question. Does this mean, I have to have a theory? Without theory, I cannot, do my research. The answer is yes and no. It's always in qualitative research, in social science research, it's always better to have a theoretical background, because it clearly gives you a foundation, and it gives you a direction as to how to move with respect to your theory. So as a researcher also, it's very helpful for you to have a theoretical understanding. But if at all you're doing an exploratory research, you're doing a descriptive research, you're just understanding a particular topic, in such a case theory often is not employed. If you're doing an exploratory research, you're just trying to explore what exactly is there, in such a case theory often is not required. So finally I would like to conclude that clear theory plus defined concepts plus logical relationships plus consistent application will definitely contribute to a very strong manuscript that will that will be very difficult for a reviewer to say no to for publication. So it's very important for you as a researcher to keep these things, keep the relationship between these concepts intact. You need to have clear theoretical understanding and define those concepts that you use, and you have to also establish logical relationships between these concepts and consistent application of these concepts, which will definitely create a very strong manuscript or a research paper for you as a social science researcher. So with that, I conclude my presentation. If you have any questions or clarification, I'll be open to answer how much ever I'm able to do.
Thank you, Dr. Subratana. That was a wonderful presentation, and you have started with the basics, with the recap, and then you have taken us through the journey of publishing a quality manuscript with a wonderful framework. And now they have got a completely, mesmerized with your presentation, I would say. Okay, thank you so much. And we have a few questions that already been popped up in the chat box. We can just go through one by one. We'll take two questions. We probably like those who would like to, ask. They can unmute and you can ask. Probably I'll just make that participants to unmute. You can unmute and you can ask.
So there's a question on conceptual framework and theoretical framework. So
Yes.
I think it's important to also understand the difference between those two. So theoretical framework actually explains how theories can be related. So when you use a theoretical framework in your study, it explains how theories can be used to understand your topic and how you relate multiple theories to understand the particular topic. So conceptual framework, on the other hand, is where you create a relationship between various concepts that you use for your study. So you have certain variables that you have defined, and how you as a researcher would like to uh, you know explain how these have a relationship. So again, you might have a question, should we have theoretical framework and conceptual framework in our study? Not necessarily. You can as a researcher, you can always decide, depending on your topic, whether conceptual framework is required or theoretical framework is required. But conceptual framework clearly talks about the concepts that you use in your study and the relationship between those concepts that you as a researcher try to build and study. So this is what is conceptual framework. So any other questions?
Yes, ma'am. Can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, while building a theory, like for example, I am working on liberal feminism. So when we approach the theory or research, should we make a separate chapter or something about this theory?
It's always better if you are able to clearly tell why you're using that theory and how it is complementing your study. That see more or less, why reviewers reject our paper is because most of the time when we are talking about abstract ideas, when we are talking about ambiguous terminologies, it more or less becomes a very descriptive explanation of certain things. When you give a theoretical background to it and say, this is the theory that makes me understand in this particular way, you are able to justify and say, I know this is why it means in a particular way. When you are able to do that, you already have a very strong grounding for your research. You have already created the impression that this is what I am trying to do. So it's always better for you to explain why you have chosen that theory for your study and how you are applying that the theory for your study. When you're talking about, I think it's a feminist theory that you were talking about, liberal feminism, or when you're using that particular theory, it's also important for you to explain why you chose that particular theory to understand your topic, how it is applied in your particular study. Just again, explaining the theory in your research work will not contribute to you having a theoretical framework. You have to build your theory on the basis of that. You have to build your research on the basis of that theory. In that case, yes, it's very much required for you to have a separate explanation as to why and how you're using it.
Yeah,
I
thank
hope
you.
I've answered.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we have a lot of people raise their hand, but I suggest that, let me thank the speaker now, and then officially I'll just close so that remaining people can stay back and the speaker will be happy to answer your questions so that those who would like to leave, they can give the feedback and they can leave. Okay, as a coordinator, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Subartana for an elegant, wonderful, and clear presentation on frameworks. And definitely, the chat box is filling with a lot of questions, and people have got a clear understanding about what one should have it in the manuscript. That is very important, and with the clear explanation and examples, you have taken us to the complete picture about the frameworks, and I'm sure that people have got benefited out of it. And we are going to have exciting other 2 day sessions left in this series, and hoping to have you all here. Thank you so much, Dr. Subirtana. You can stay here so that people would like to ask questions. You can read it from the chat box as well. Those who would like to give the feedback and they can leave, please do so, because the feedback link is being shared in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to formally thank again, my college, my department, and the research colloquium for organizing this event. Thank you.
Yeah, still you can read the questions and ask,
Yes.
or people can unmute and you can ask the speaker directly.
Um,
Ma'am, good evening.
okay, so Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Ma'am, my question is how do we justify the indicators when you're writing your research paper? As you said, we have variables under study. How do I justify the indicators of those variables? As you have presented in your PPT, like you have defined the indicators. Like we can't find the indicators in previous research. This may happen. So how do I proceed ahead if I have such a situation in my particular research?
So when you have certain variables that you have, you're using for your particular study, how to understand this variable, you have to determine the variables, the indicators depending on the study that you're trying to do. For example, here I have spoken about, sleep pattern. How to understand sleep pattern. So you have to again try to understand how sleep patterns can be affected, and you have to note it down. This is why this comes under your conceptual clarity, because the conceptual clarity is completely at the discretion of the researcher. What you are trying to do in your research, not necessarily it has to be justified by some other research. So your indicators are completely yours. What exactly am I trying to use to understand this particular variable? So as a researcher, you have the discretion. Probably you can try to understand sleep patterns by trying to understand how much time they sleep, how the quality of sleep that they get. So that is completely up to you as a researcher, and that is why it is important for you to define these variables and also mention the indicators. I hope I've answered your question to the maximum level that I can.
Okay, so it
Hello,
means that
madam.
we need not to take any help of the earlier researchers, and we need not to quote that yes, we have picked up from here. This is what is my understanding.
You using others, other researchers' reference could let you understand how these variables can work in other theoretical frameworks, or how they can relate with other variables. But just like that, employing them in your study depends on the topic that you are trying to study. You just cannot uproot another framework and say this will work for me. That depends on the topic, how you try to build it. So that is why I try to say that choosing your theory and justifying why you have chosen the theory is very important, because somebody else might have used another theory to answer a very different question. So just because a premise of that theory works for our particular study, not necessarily the entire framework will work for us. So you can read other researchers' work to understand how this could work in different relations. But it's very important for you as a researcher to determine how you're going to let it work in your particular research.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, I have a question. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Dr. Subhitana,
Can you hear me, ma'am?
ma'am, 1 minute, ma'am. She's on mute.
Yeah.
Dr. Subhitana, your mic is on mute.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. So any other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, just referring one theory in my research. In that
Okay.
particular theory, have around 7 variables.
Okay.
But for my research, I need only 2 variables.
Okay.
Is it okay to implement, ma'am?
Yes, as long as it lets you, understand your study, and it helps your study, that's more than enough. Not necessary, just because, there are multiple. For example, I had mentioned, for the student performance review, I had mentioned a list of concepts, students, teachers. So many concepts were mentioned. Not necessary all of them have to be relevant for my particular study. I will pick and choose, what is going to be relevant for my study, depending on, what exactly am I trying to answer in the research problem. So not necessarily all the variables have to be included.
Yeah, got it, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, good evening.
I have texted in the group, ma'am, in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
I am in the science department, nutrition department.
Okay.
So I'm actually, this is I think it's a divine work that this topic had come up today. Thank you so much for you and your team. My question is, will the conceptual framework or the theoretic framework that we develop, can that alone be presented or published as an article? That is question one.
Yes, you can publish a paper purely on how you build a theoretical framework and or a conceptual framework.
Okay.
See again, when you talk about theoretical framework, it is built from a theory. On the other hand, you also have the inductive deductive method where you try to induce a theory into through your findings. So in either case, it's completely fine to create try to publish how you have built a theory. Of course,
Okay.
you can get it published in journals that publish papers related to research methodology, building theoretical frameworks. So it will be very useful for others to understand how theories can be built.
Okay. Okay. And will it be an original article or a review article? Because the papers generally they don't mention, they call for concept papers.
Yes.
So where do we place our this framework papers as?
To be very honest, I'm not very clear how it will work, since you're from the science background. But then it can be it can be a full-fledged concept paper depending on how you use that theory and how you build it. So it depends on how you take the paper forward. So that can be definitely done.
Okay. So because in our science field, it's usually either the original paper or the reviews. So I'm finding it this falling somewhere in between. So because we develop the study based on the reviews, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And okay. And one more question. Okay, just two more questions. Can you just mention the journals that you said where they ask for these methodologies and concept papers? Any journals that you could?
I'm not. I don't have a list of journals that actually publish these papers.
Okay.
So maybe you can contact me through my email ID. I can help you with that. But as of now, I don't have a list of journals specifically where you can get
Sure.
these published.
Sure, ma'am.
Very sorry about that.
Where can I get your email ID?
It should be available in the website, college website.
I'll check that out.
Or else you can mail to MCCRC too, ma'am. MCCRC at mcc.edu.in.
And they can
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful session. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, madam. One small question for.
Good evening, sir. Yes.
Yes. As you said, one theory is enough for establishing theoretical framework. But in multidisciplinary research, what to do? How many theories that we can have?
Sir, I did not say one theory is enough. I said as a beginner in building theoretical frameworks, it's always better to start with understanding one theory and trying to build. But in interdisciplinary research, of course, multiple theories should be used or can be used to understand the entirety of the problem. For example, even when I tried to do the exercise, I had three theories that I had to use to connect all the variables that are required to study that particular topic. So it's just as a beginner in research, it's better to use one theory or core theory until you learn to relate those theories to create a stronger foundation. Once you have the capability of connecting those theories and justifying the connection, then you can use n number of theories to do your study. There is no restriction as to how many theories a researcher has to use. But irrespective of how many theories you use for your particular research, it's very important for you to justify why you're using those researches and how you are using it in your study. So that you have to keep it in mind. But how many other theories you feel is required for your study, you have the liberty to use it.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So I think there is no more questions. So I formally
Yes.
once again thank you, Dr. Subitana, for the wonderful
Thank you,
and the
sir.
interactive section. Thank you,
Thank you
ma'am.
so much. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.